Hello. The Divine Code reading for February 9th, pages 493 and 494. We're in chapter The Prohibition of Relations with Other Men's Wives, the second half of topic number 1. A Gentile man who transgresses by having relations in the abnormal way with another man's Gentile wife is not liable for a capital sin. So he would not be liable. Remember, when the terminology normal and abnormal is a euphemism for vaginal and anal intercourse, respectively. So when it's saying it in the abnormal way, that's referring to anal intercourse, and for Torah law, that would not be it would not be liability for capital punishment by a court of law. However, it is still abhorrent and would be it would definitely be forbidden. It's just not, the technical rules for what is and is not a liability in a capital case is by what it says, how it's explained in the Bible. Certain relations are either normal or abnormal, would both be considered liable. But in the issue of a adultery with a married woman, that would not fall under the category. And that's the verse, Genesis chapter 2, 24, and cling with his wife. So the man's clinging must only be with his wife and not with the wife of another man. This command not to have adulterous relations with the wife of another man refers to the act of clinging, that's the volk in Hebrew, which specifies that liability for capital punishment in adultery applies only for normal relations. And that's discussed in Tractate Sanhedrin 58b. And it's important to note that when we're discussing Torah law, we're not discussing what humans would consider logical. The Bible is not bound by logic. The Bible can be explained by logic, but it's not bound by logic. And divine law is what it is. Now, in the area it's going to discuss more in today's reading, in the area of courts, the courts can then come in and institute logical reasoning, laws based on logical reasoning. That's the job of the court. And therefore, areas that might seem odd can be worked through the area of the human courts instituting laws based on logical reasoning. What we're studying, though, right now in this paragraph is referring to divine law that follows divine reasoning, which is not the same as human logical reasoning. Although, and this is where it gets into the courts, although there is no capital liability involved, it is abhorrent for a man to have relations with another man's betrothed woman. So there's no capital liability for adultery for a Gentile, for a non-Jew who's betrothed, and adultery in that situation, because the person is not considered married at that point. In Jewish law, which follows a different set of rules in the Torah, the betrothed woman would be considered married, fully married, according to Jewish law, but would not be considered. It's slightly different, but it's still considered a capital sin, whereas in non-Jewish law, it would not be considered a capital sin with regard to a betrothed woman. It would still be abhorrent, though. Tosafot on Sanhedrin 57b and Bava Batra 16b regarding the misorasa, a woman who is betrothed, engaged to a man without yet having the normal relations with him for the sake of consummating the marriage bond. Tosafot, Rid, on Tractate Baba Batra, there writes that though there is no liability for a capital sin if another man has relations with her, there is a prohibition, as the Talmud says there, he has transgressed 5 sins. How much more so does this apply to one who cohabits with another man's wife in the abnormal way? So there's definitely sins involved. It's not considered a capital sin by Torah law, but it's definitely considered inappropriate. It's considered a horrible thing. Or with, okay, so for a man to have relations with another man's betrothed woman, or for a married woman in the abnormal way, as such actions incur punishment by the hand of heaven. So there is the other so there is punishment by there's punishment by an earthly court, and that's spelled out according to the divine law given in the Torah. Then there are things that would be considered abhorrent, and those things would be punished through the heavenly court. Things, the person's life would be shortened, for example. That's handled through the heavenly court, but it's not required for the earthly court. One of the sins of the generation of the flood was that men would habitually grab, that is, kidnap women from under their wedding canopies and rape them. As stated in Rashi's exclamation on Genesis 6:2 and Bereshit Rabbah, chapter 26:5, it is also explained in Bereshit Rabbah there that it was legalized, or at least there was no legal or social judgment or punishment for it, and all dignitaries and prominent men were involved in this sin. So this involves it's referred to here as kidnapping. I'm not sure if this necessarily would fit into the legal, the technical framework of what would be considered kidnapping. Usually kidnapping involves for long-term enslavement, whereas this appears to be referring to a short-term control of the person. So how that factors in, I'm not sure. I think kidnapping might be, if it's for enslavement, might be considered a capital sin. I'm not sure on that, but it would be definitely be considered a very serious sin. This is also a serious sin, but it's not necessarily a capital sin by an earthly court. Still, it is clear that any sin is made up of several parts, each one separately being forbidden. From this, it is clear that even if a man cohabits by consent with a woman who is only betrothed to another man, so there's no rape or complete stealing involved, even though this is not as severe as the sin of the generation of the flood, it is still abhorrent and prohibited. Another apparent proof is from Tractate Sota 10a, where it is explained that Judah asked Tamar, "Did your father accept an acquisition on your behalf?" Meaning, did he marry her off as a minor? Judah asked this, even though there is no capital sin for a minor Gentile in such a case, as there would be with a fully married adult woman who would be liable for adultery. See topics 4 and 5 below. That's coming up. We're in topic 1 right now. Thus, we see that a Gentile Miorasha, betrothed woman, is forbidden to other men, although there is no liability for capital sin. So we see there's a variety of different elements to these sins that have to be, each one has to be understood individually and then also understood together. And each one needs to be looked at on its own right. A Noahide court must impose punishment for such actions, even though there is no specific commandment for Gentiles stated in the Torah regarding these sins. Clearly, this obligation rests on Noahide courts within the commandment for legal statutes, dinim in Hebrew. So even though these are not instituted as Torah law, regarding a betrothed woman or regarding abnormal relations, the Torah does not require a capital punishment in these cases. However, it is the duty of the court system to promote a civilized, settled society. And therefore, there are many rules that need to be instituted by the court as the court sees fit. And it's actually the mitzvah of the court to make these determinations. It is implied by Bereshit Rabbah, 26:5. That's in the commentary Bereshit Rabbah, not necessarily in the book of Genesis, but in Bereshit Rabbah, the commentary, chapter 26:5, unit 5. And Rambam's exclamation on Genesis 6:2. That's Ramban's exclamation, that when dignitaries and other prominent people with the public's knowledge, it automatically brings about a public attitude of lawlessness. If the courts do not enforce such manners for prominent people, it shows the general population that these types of sins are allowed. For this, it is inferred that court officials do not have a responsibility to bring sinners to judgment. They must also act with restraint themselves in order to uphold standards of righteousness that will keep most people from sinning. So the courts, and within the Jewish law, and it's also going to be brought out in the Noahide law under the auspices of the one mitzvah of dinim. There are a number of Jewish mitzvahs that are part of that. Would be not to show deference to the people of statute. People like dignitaries are looked to by the rest of society for examples. And if the dignitaries are allowed to act in a dishonorable manner, then the rest of society will also think it's okay to follow their example. Therefore, it's necessary for courts to take them seriously and to require high standards. Not that they're going to hold them to a higher standard, but rather make certain that they are held to the standards that we're going to hold everybody else to. Because that everybody watches what happens with the dignitary, with the high people. Topic number 2. There are 2 terms used for marriage regarding Gentiles. First, a woman who has relations with her husband, ba'at Baal, as a fully married woman, to whom adultery is a capital sin, and B, the other category, a betrothed woman, miorasa, with whom it is forbidden to another man to have relations, but not a capital sin. Tosafot Rid Bava Batra 16b, and this is implied by Tractate Sota 10a and Rashi there, as mentioned in footnote 62. According to those opinions that Gentiles acquire his wife. See footnote 87, that's in tomorrow's reading, and the end of topic 5 below. And topic 5 will be in a couple days. Adultery with a betrothed woman would be theft, since the woman was acquired by her husband. So regarding the Jewish law, the woman is technically acquired by her husband, usually by giving a ring or something of value. She's acquired and becomes property of her husband, and not in a manner of chattel, but in a technical manner. That's how that's understood. And therefore, in that state, the woman would be, it would be theft to take the woman, and that just adds to the legalities involved. It's a separate question of what's happened would be that question, if the Gentile society understands that the woman's been acquired. Now that's not necessarily how it's understood within Gentile society, so it would depend on what country or what locale the person is in. Even if this is not the actual Torah law for Gentiles, it will apply if a society decides Gentile wives are acquired by their husbands, in which case adultery with a betrothed woman would be considered stealing from the husband, as is written in Likutei Sikot, cited in the next foot. That's Likutei Sikot, volume 30, page 31, and footnote 14 there. But it would not be a capital sin. In most cases, depending on the locale, would not necessarily be considered a capital sin in a Torah-oriented Noahide court regarding the betrothed woman. The betrothed woman has not established a marital bond and is not considered married within Torah law for Gentiles. The couple only agree to become married in the future and perhaps made some formal commitment. Still, her betrothal makes her prohibited to have relations with other men, since such an act would be akin to stealing. And that's the Likutei Sikot, volume 30, page 31, footnote 14 there. So it would be considered akin to stealing, so it would not necessarily be stealing that would meet the Torah standard for non-Jews under the law, the prohibition of theft. However, it's akin, it's similar to stealing, and therefore would be prohibited with a betrothed woman. Even if a woman cohabited with her husband to be, but before they participated in a wedding ceremony, that is, before they entered the wedding canopy. If those relations were not for the purpose of consummating marriage, but were done only in a provisional, promiscuous way, the woman is not called a bulat bal, one who has been wedded through marital relations, and liability for adultery is not yet taken effect upon her. This is clear from Rambam, Laws of Marriage, see footnote 89, And footnote 89 is in tomorrow's reading. So in the case of when we speak of having, the married couple having to consummate the marriage, that's understood to be after they get married. Now, a formal marriage is not required for non-Jews. It's allowed. It's recommended, but it's not required. Therefore, if they're doing it in just a promiscuous manner and then they're going to go back to their own places, they had some fun for one night, that's not considered being married. Now, if they're living together and they have relations and the relations is part, they understand that the relations is part of their living together, and they're going to have a ceremony later on, but now they're actually considered a couple that are living together, then that would be considered married, and that'll also be discussed in the later part of this chapter. So if they have not consummated the marriage, or if they have had relations but not for the sake of marriage, then the woman would be considered betrothed, and it would not be a capital punishment unless the court determines as such. But it would not be considered capital punishment, but it would be considered abhorrent and would be prohibited to have relations with such a woman. Thank you.